Welcome to the Happy Lawyer Project. I'm your host, Akoma Moronu, and I created this show to help lawyers find happiness in life with a law degree. Together with my guests, we provide the knowledge, skills, insight, inspiration, and encouragement you need to find your happy. Today's episode is brought to you by our wonderful sponsors over at Felix Gray Glasses. I fell in love with my own pair of Felix Grays when I was sitting in one of those really long presentations and noticed that I didn't have a headache from squinting to read the slides. Felix Grays are not only wonderful for the eyes, but they're a stylish way to decrease digital eye strain. If you're anything like me, you're familiar with the dry eyes, headaches, and blurry vision that is all too common at the end of a long day of sitting in front of a computer screen. And these glasses have fixed all of that for me. Best of all, folks, over at Felix Gray, they offer free shipping and returns with a 30-day risk-free return policy. If you're interested in learning more, head over to felixgrayglasses.com/happylawyer to let them know I sent you. One of the most common questions I get from listeners is, how do you position yourself for that promotion, new job, or career change? On today's show, I have on the writing guru herself. Wendy Weiner is a professional resume writer and former lawyer who helps her clients craft a personal brand that reflects not just what they do, but who they are. She shares her story of transitioning throughout her legal career and eventually how she transitioned out of the law altogether. She's going to share tips for resume writing, and we even discuss the common mistake that most lawyers are making. I learned so much on this episode, so I hope you guys enjoy. Welcome back to the Happy Lawyer Project, you guys. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to Wendy Weiner. Wendy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I would love if you could just begin with a brief description of who you are and what it is that you do.
Sure. So I am a former BigLaw and in-house attorney. I followed my dreams of becoming a professional writer and found happiness in my own career path outside of law. What I tell people a lot of times is I practiced insurance litigation for 11 and a half years before I made the leap into entrepreneurship. And I also was a college writing professor for 7 years. Today, I am a career branding expert with a massive writing portfolio, and I focus on helping attorneys, executives, and business leaders in creating their personal and professional brand to effectively market them for a new job, new leadership opportunity, or even in their own business. I also hold 4 resume writing and career coaching certifications. I'm the president-elect of the National Resume Writers Association, and I'm also published and featured in more than 40 major media outlets.
So you are credentialed, I gather. So you know what you're talking about.
Yes, I'm an expert.
Fine. I'll accept that premise. But before we dive into all of that, because I think it's really exciting and it's one of the number one things that I get asked about and asked to have someone on the show to talk about, is that idea of career branding and how to market yourself within your career, but also as you transition into different roles in your career. But before we go there, I'd like to talk a little bit about yourself as a lawyer and kind of what that experience was like for you. So could you just share how you ended up in law school?
Sure. I get that question asked a lot. So I actually grew up in the 80s, in the generation that watched LA Law. I also read a lot of John Grisham novels, so that definitely imparted some interest for me. But more importantly, I was a high school speech and debate champion, and public speaking was really one of my true talents. So initially, the law intrigued me. I was persuaded by my grandmother, who was very wise, said that I would be a fantastic lawyer because I love to argue and prove my point. And to this day, I think she's still right.
So you were in insurance litigation for a while, and I know that you wrote an article last year that was pretty widely circulated about how you ultimately ended up using your law degree to leave the law. So let's chat a little about that transition for you. At what point did you start thinking about leaving the law, and then how did you make that transition?
Sure. So I found myself when I got out of law school, I started out in BigLaw. I worked for a national law firm that had 450 attorneys. It was an amazing experience. It was great for the prestige, for my resume, for my legal career and building it. But ultimately, what I found was it was a very contentious, not just in terms of the type of work I did, having to deal with all the different types of personalities in law. I think litigation brings a very adversarial personality to the table, and you have to be a specific kind of person in order to handle that. So I definitely ping-ponged a lot, from big law into small firms to mid-sized firms, back to big law firms, and eventually in-house counsel. And the common denominator for me was I was really good at what I did. I was always the brief writer at every law firm. I did fantastic legal work. I took great depositions. I was amazing in court. But the common denominator was I just never felt personally or professionally fulfilled in it. I always felt that there was something missing in every job that I had. And ultimately, it was just that being a lawyer, I believe, was not my destiny. I enjoyed writing more, enjoyed talking to people more, and there was some type of therapeutic element that was missing in my career.
So what was the catalyst for for a long time you thought somewhere else, maybe somewhere else, somewhere else. So at what point were you like, maybe not law at all?
It was probably at the end of 2013 when I really learned about the resume industry. So I should back up and say that I started teaching college writing classes at the time that I began practicing law. Because I was teaching in the college writing classes, I was teaching my students how to write resumes and how to interview for jobs and how to better express themselves and find the career that they enjoyed pursuing. Because I was always about personal and professional fulfillment. That was just sort of my mantra is, to be happy, you have to be personally and professionally fulfilled. So it seemed to me that when I was teaching these students how to write essays and how to write resumes and things of that nature, I should really have a writing business. I was sitting down with my parents one night at dinner, and my mom said, you're the writing guru. You're the person that everyone goes to for writing help. Why don't you start a business doing writing, and maybe eventually, you could leave practicing law? And I thought, okay, maybe down the road. I never really truly envisioned that what I have today would have allowed me the ability to leave practicing law. So it wasn't until 2013 I was doing this on the side, making some extra money, but not really pursuing it the way that I am today. I learned about the resume industry, and I had gone to the Resume Writers Conference in early 2014 and got certified. And I really learned about the resume industry and realized that I could truly make a difference, especially in the lives of lawyers who may want to get out of big law and go work in-house or go work for the government. I knew that I had something very special.
How did you kind of manage teaching while you were moving around throughout your legal career? Because I know so many people kind of give up the thing that they like in order to pursue the law. And then when they want to transition out, they don't really have anything to fall back on because they've stopped doing all the things that they enjoyed and felt passionate about before they became a lawyer. And so I think it's really great that you were able to keep that up, but I wasn't sure I'm sure there were times when you thought, I just don't have time and I need to just stop doing this thing so that I can focus on the law. Why did you keep it up, and how did it remain a priority in your life?
That's a great question. So for me, I was teaching the college writing classes 2 nights during the week. So it didn't interfere with my teaching schedule, never interfered with my practicing of law. And then I also taught college writing classes on Saturday mornings, taught 2 back-to-back classes. So the teaching aspect never really interfered with practicing law because I was doing it on the outskirts of when I was working. So, even if I was working a 12 to 14 hour day, I did the work for the teaching outside of my lawyer hours. What ultimately happened for me, which is why I left teaching, I decided to change my life around. I got really healthy. I found I had some thyroid problems, and I actually ran the New York City Marathon. So training for a marathon took over another part of my life where I couldn't practice law, teach college writing classes, and also train for a major marathon. So I had to give something up. So I gave up the teaching of the writing classes. And at that time, I decided to open my writing business, but do it on the side. It was a very, very minuscule part of my life at the time. It was something that I did more for freelance work and fun, but it was never something that truly became a major part of my life until the end of 2013, when I really began to put more time and energy into building my website, gaining notoriety. And then ultimately I was really living what you would consider a double life, where I was a lawyer by day, a writer by night, and on the weekends. I worked over 100 hours a week to carve out my business plan over 18 months before I left practicing law.
And so did you do those certifications while you were still practicing, or did you kind of dive into those once you had already left?
I had already gotten a few certifications while I was still practicing law.
For those people out there, I'm really digging into this because I know there's a lot of people who want to do it, but don't feel like they have the time. And so for the people who are like, I'm so busy already, how would I ever find the time? What advice would you give them about kind of starting this next thing?
So I feel that if you really want something bad enough, you're going to make the time. So whether it's giving up time going out with your friends or giving up extra time that you would normally lay around and relax and decompress on the weekends, I was really hustling and grinding for my side business. I'm a big fan of Gary Vaynerchuk.
Yep.
And so he always talks about the grind and the hustle and chasing your dreams. And, there's only 24 hours in a day, but you got to want to work, 27 hours in a day in order to make the dream happen. And that's really what did it for me. At the time, it was in a different situation also because I was working in-house at that point. So for me, my 80 hours a week that I worked in BigLaw was no longer such. I was working more of standard 9 to 5 hours or 9 to 6 hours. So I wasn't nearly working, let's say, more than 60 hours a week as a lawyer. And so ultimately, any extra time that I had, I was building into my business. So for example, I still had a lunch break. I would spend my lunch break calling back clients or sitting in my car with my laptop in a shopping parking lot and working on a document. So I was really trying to maximize any extra bandwidth that I had in order to do this. And the caveat to that was I was not married. I don't have kids. So at that point, it was very easy for me to take all of that extra time and build it into the writing business. Really my side hustle is what you would call it at the time.
I'm a huge fan of Gary Vaynerchuk, and I was actually listening to a recent speech he did over the weekend, and someone asked him, how do you stay so motivated when you fail at something? And he said, what's the alternative? And I thought that was really poignant because it kind of speaks to this conversation as well, which is if you want to build that side hustle and you really want to get that expertise in a new area and you say you don't have time, like there's no alternative but to make the time. Do you know what I mean? Like,
right.
It's not going to happen without you intentionally setting the time aside and really prioritizing it. So I'm glad you brought him up because I think that sometimes people want the easy way. And even though it might be simple, it's never really easy.
I agree. And one thing that I was going to say is I think for a lot of lawyers, and including myself, it was really hard to leave the practice of law, mentally, emotionally, everything. I mean, I had already put 11 years into my career. I had put in $150,000 into my legal education. I had student loans. I spent 3 years in law school. I took the bar exam. I mean, those are really big hurdles to overcome. And you spend 11 plus years, all this money, all this time building this career. And at the time, I had a great salary. Where are you going to find a job as a lawyer leaving the practice of law making $125,000+ a year? That's a cushiony 9 to 5 job with a company car, with a company laptop, with a company bonus every year. And I had so many perks that it made it really difficult for me to even consider wanting to leave the practice of law. But what happened for me was I had a shift that I really began to get a taste of success when I started having just constant leads coming to me for the resumes and people were making direct sales on my website. I knew that I had something and I knew that I had to make a choice. Did I want the freedom and the independence of sort of having my own business and deciding how I wanted to live life on my own terms, or did I want to continue working for someone? And ultimately, looking back, I think I was always destined to be a business owner and an entrepreneur. I just didn't want to recognize it because we're so accustomed to the security of a paycheck that we're scared to take that leap of faith. And for me, I told myself when I did it, there was no turning back. It was either sink or swim. I actually gave myself 6 months and I told myself that if I couldn't make it doing this full time within 6 months, I was going to have to consider going back to law. But at that point, I had such a sweet taste of success that I refused to do anything that would lead me to go back. So in essence, the way I became so successful at what I did was I outwork and therefore I outperform. And the idea is I can outwork anyone, or anything. And so that was my mentality. And it's very similar to what Gary Vaynerchuk preaches all the time. If you accept that mentality, you're going to be successful.
So how did you set that date for yourself for when to leave? Did you set kind of a date on your calendar and just work towards it? Or was there like a benchmark you wanted to reach before you left?
It's a great question. It was the end of February 2015. I was driving to work on a Monday. And I remember driving to work. I always had the Sunday night blues. That was something that was very consistent throughout my career. I always was depressed on Sundays, always had a case of the Mondays. Every time Friday was around, it was like I was living for the weekends. And there's something wrong if all you are doing in your career is living for the weekends. Weekends should be a time where you're with your family, you're decompressing, you're recuperating, you're recharging your batteries, but it shouldn't be something that you're living for. And I remember that was the day for me that kind of put the nail in the coffin. I decided that I was done practicing law. And so I packed up my things. I took an Uber home and I started my life over again. And it was fantastic. I remember the one scary thing that I felt was I don't have a car. I have to go to the dealer and get a new car. That was probably the scariest thing for me. But I had money saved up. I had a nest egg that I knew I could live off of for 6 months because I was doing the business on the side at that point. So I had saved up for 18 months and I knew that I could live off of that money for 6 months. And I gave myself that timeline of 6 months to either do it or fail. And since then, I've just continued to really push myself as far as I can go.
So I think there's so many things in your story that are really motivational and inspirational for people who are interested in doing something else. But I think most importantly, it's very practical, the advice that you're giving about kind of the work it takes and the commitment it takes to make that transition. But I would be remiss now if I didn't take the opportunity to ask the writing guru herself for some tips on resume writing. And I know that so many lawyers, especially those of us who were kind of raised in big law and were kind of put onto, myself, you go to a good school, you go to a good firm, you always have someone there kind of whispering in your ear and telling you how to do it. And then when you want to go out on your own, you no longer have those resources. So as an initial question, I would love to start with, how do you think lawyers should be thinking about resume building? Because I know that so many people think about how things will look on their resume, but I don't necessarily know that they're thinking about that correctly. And I didn't know if you had any thoughts.
Sure. So one thing is that today it's not about building a resume, but building a personal brand. And what has really changed for us today, and I began obviously job searching and working as a lawyer in the pre-digital age era, but the digital age has changed everything about the way we do business, about the way we job search. And when you think about building your resume, you have to think about a few things. What's your unique value? How can you market that value? And who are you marketing that value to? And so I tell clients all the time, and I have this on my website, is your job is what you do, but your brand is who you are. And you have to really think about how do you identify yourself beyond just saying that you're a lawyer or you're an insurance attorney. I always saw myself as a very highly skilled researcher and writer. Are you a public speaker? Are you someone who does more transactional work? Are you someone that does a lot of client interfacing? And you really have to think about also the aspects of the law that you're good at and what you enjoy doing. And that is what helps you build your personal brand. The other thing too that's different is the way that I was taught to write my resume out of law school is not something that's going to work in the digital age, because now you've got more than 80% of companies using software to scan the resumes for the right number of keywords. Now today your resume has to capture a reader's attention and garner that attention within 5 to 7 seconds. So when someone scans your resume visually, and your education at this point, 10 years out, is on the second page, person doesn't know that you did a judicial internship, or that you clerked for a major judge, or that you were on law review, or you graduated top 10% of your class. You have to front load a lot of those key accomplishments in your educational background in order for someone to actually see that at the outset. So that's what's really changed today, is just the dynamics of the way the resume is presented, the way it's viewed, the way it's scanned. And obviously building a personal brand is another element that's changed it.
What are your thoughts on how long a resume should be? Because you said page 2, and I know people have differing opinions on whether there should be a page 2.
So the resume industry rule or trend is that if you've got more than 10 years of professional experience, it's expected that your resume should be 2 pages. But Take myself, for example, when I came out of law school, I was also teaching college writing classes. So for every job that I had, I also had another section in my resume for my academic and teaching experience. Then I was also very heavily involved when I was in law school. I was in a lot of clubs and very active in memberships. And I also researched for 2 professors and was published in their journals. So I had a lot of stuff that went into my education section. And if you have, let's say, a JD and an MBA, or even if you have a master's degree, beyond just having your JD, your sections are going to continue to elongate. So the further you go in your legal career, the more remote things at the early set of your career they're going to become. So for example, what I tell clients all the time is it really depends. So you can come out of law school and have had a prior career before going to law school. So you want to include some of your earlier career experience. So most of the time, most lawyers' resumes, when they're a few years out into practice, are actually going to be 2 pages. And that's acceptable, by the way.
Interesting. So how often should people be looking at their resume and updating their resume?
It's a great question. I actually say every 6 months. And the reason why I say every 6 months is because it's still fresh in your mind. If you update your resume every year or couple of years, you begin to forget about certain things that you're doing. So what I actually recommend is have a brag book. Have a notepad that serves as a brag book, and you keep a folder in there also of emails that you get from clients who compliment your work, performance evaluations, hold on to them, feedback that you get from partners and HR executives, and also even clients. Hold on to those things. Keep a running list also of key representative engagements or key cases that you've worked on, projects that you've led, because when you sit down to write about yourself in your resume, you're writing from a very subjective standpoint. So it's very difficult to write objectively and think objectively when you're sitting and trying to quantify everything you've done. Most of us are trained to only write about the cases that we've, types of cases that we've handled, meaning subject matter, handling criminal defense cases or white collar criminal defense cases or insurance coverage cases. But people don't get specific as to the type of finesse they've put into the work. How many jury verdicts have you had? How many trials have you first or second chaired? How many global settlements have you handled? Types of mediations that you've handled that have settled the cases before going to trial. So we don't necessarily think about specific examples. We think about more concrete things, drafting motions, responding to discovery, conducting research. But those are skill sets. You want to have more accomplishments and results and key achievements in your resume.
So I know that you work with lawyers as well as other professionals, and I'd be interested if there are certain types of mistakes that you see lawyers making that are different from other mistakes that other professionals may make.
So more than 50% of my clients have a JD. Now, not all of them are practicing attorneys. The bulk of the attorneys I actually work with, believe it or not, are either in-house attorneys, they are chief strategy officers, chief legal officers, or they're hybrids, meaning that they're general counsel and executive vice president, because there's a certain element of executive leadership that happens at the very top level of companies when an attorney is general counsel. So many times they're general counsel and a strategic business partner. For those attorneys, most often their resumes fit into the formulaic equation that resumes have today, where there's a branding statement, a professional summary, some bullet points about key executive highlights, and then moving into the experience section. Most law firm attorneys tend to write their resumes in the traditional pre-digital age, old school way, meaning that, you have sort of your education title on the left margin, and then you have some of your stuff on the right, and you have probably about 10 bullet points of information for your experience section for each role. But that's not the way that the resume should be written today. So I think the hardest trend is the law firm lawyers who are trained to actually write the way the law schools taught them to write instead of the way that the trends are for resumes today.
I can completely see that. I actually was on the recruiting committee at both firms where I was at, and I was always surprised by how boring law school student resumes were. And I was always somebody who very much recruited based on personality, because I felt like the job itself wasn't very hard. So once you get to a certain level of school and a certain level of applicant, I felt like they could all do the job, but their level of happiness and the fit that we were going to find in the candidate was really going to depend on their personality. And it was often hard to discern any of that based on their resume.
It is. And that is something that makes it difficult, which is why your LinkedIn profile is so important. So I'm actually surprised a lot of times when I talk to a lot of attorneys, if they're in-house attorneys, most often they have a full out LinkedIn profile, but a lot of law firm lawyers don't. And a lot of law students don't. And it's because, well, for one, I think the law schools are not encouraging the law students to have a LinkedIn profile or talking about the importance of it. But most people don't necessarily know how to brand themselves because they think that all they are is an attorney or all they are is a law student. And so they have to really think outside the box in a more objective way of how to sell themselves. What is their unique value proposition? And that is what has become developing your personal brand today.
So I'm going to make one point, which is that law firms also do not encourage people to be on LinkedIn. I don't know if you're aware of that. A lot of them have in their social media policy very strict restrictions around being on LinkedIn.
Interesting.
I know. I very mixed feelings about that. I mean, law firms, you know how they are. They're always slow to change, especially when it comes to technology, and they think of everything as liability.
Right.
So they have a lot of nervousness around their associates putting themselves out there as experts in any certain area of the law without kind of the ability to vet and control. Right.
Well, the other thing too is legal recruiters are all over LinkedIn looking for law firm lawyers. I mean, I was constantly, this is even when LinkedIn was not as popular as it is today. I was constantly getting recruited just by virtue of having a profile on LinkedIn listing where I worked. My stuff was so accessible to recruiters that I was constantly being contacted by recruiters on LinkedIn when I wasn't job searching. Asking if I was interested in new opportunities. That's just statistically, it's known that lawyers do jump around a lot, especially litigation lawyers.
So for young lawyers who are kind of trying to think about their personal brand, I think many of them are probably struggling with that. So if you have any kind of quick tips or advice about as they're going through their careers, how they should think about pursuing work, pursuing relationships and opportunities so that they can start to develop that personal brand around their careers, what advice would you give them?
My advice always is to make a list of skills that you believe you're really good at and also things that you enjoy doing. So, for example, you could be a great researcher and writer, but if you don't enjoy it, it's going to be hard to really look at yourself inwardly and identify yourself as a researcher and writer. The other thing to do is to ask other people in your life. I would definitely mention doing is when you begin to take survey of how people view you, you begin to sometimes see yourself on the inside more.
That is great advice. So I am looking at the time and I want to respect your time this evening because I know you have big plans. So before I let you go, I have just a couple more questions. First and foremost, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you and learn more about what you're doing?
My website is writingguru.net. You can Google my name. You can also Google the Writing Guru. Definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I have a business Facebook page, and I also have an Instagram account.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being a part of this project. I'll link to all of that in the show notes so people can get that at www.thehappylawyerproject.com. And I'm just love to know that there's a resource like you out there because I know it's so valuable to so many people in finding that kind of career that's actually going to fit who they are and what they love. Before I let you go, I'm going to ask you one last question that I ask everybody who's on the show, and that is, what do you think separates happy lawyers from those who struggle to find happiness in life with a law degree?
So I think that there are a lot of happy lawyers out there. Most of them tend to be working for themselves in-house or for the government. My brother is a prime example. So he's 5.5 years younger than me, and he is actually a prosecutor and handles some really exciting cases. In fact, I have had the opportunity to go and watch my brother in court, and especially in trial, and to see the passion and enthusiasm in his face when he's, on trial, taking a witness statement or even, let's say, giving a closing or opening statement is passion that I personally just did not have. And so one thing that I believed is I was meant to do something else, and sometimes you recognize it. So I think where the unhappy lawyers come in are the ones that just somehow don't have that passion. I believe that in life, in order for you to love what you are doing, there has to be passion there. And if you feel that you're not passionate about your career, really consider things that you can do differently. And one thing that I definitely wanted to mention is there's other avenues for routes that lawyers can go into outside of the traditional law firm atmosphere or legal field. Things like public policy development, risk management, anti-money laundering, compliance, corporate governance, and even communications. So there's so many different ways that lawyers can find happiness and leverage that law degree. And that's what I think is the biggest takeaway from this is you have to love what you do, and you can still love leveraging your law degree even outside of the practice of law.
I love that, and I completely agree. Thank you so much, Wendy, for coming on tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening today, and if you guys enjoyed the show, I'd love for you to share it or head on over to iTunes and leave me a rating and review. I know it's a huge favor, but it's really the best way you can show the podcast some love and help me grow the show. Lastly, I'd love to thank our newest sponsor, Felix Gray Glasses. It's super important to me and my mission here at the Happy Lawyer Project to only share stories, services, and products that I feel will truly help you be wildly happy in your own lives. So I've been really excited about my partnership with Felix Gray. Not only do I feel better since buying my pair, but I've also find it easier to fall and stay asleep. And as a lawyer, you know how crucial good sleep can be. So if you're interested in learning more, head on over to felixgrayglasses.com/happy lawyer to see if they'd be a good fit for you. As always, until next time.